I never thought a simple hiking trip would turn into one of the hardest, most frightening experiences of my life. I had always loved hiking. For years, I had taken long trails in different parts of the country, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. I liked the feeling of being away from everything, surrounded only by trees, dirt, and silence. I felt safe in nature, safer than in crowded towns or busy roads. That belief almost cost me my life one summer when I decided to hike a trail that I didn't know much about. It was late July, and the heat had been building up for weeks. The news kept warning about heat waves, but I didn't listen. I had a long weekend off work and didn't want to waste it sitting at home. I packed up my backpack with what I thought would be enough supplies: water bottles, a small water filter, some protein bars, a flashlight, a lighter, a knife, a map, and a light jacket. I figured I wouldn't need more since I only planned on doing a long day hike. The trail I picked wasn't very popular. That was part of the reason I chose it. I liked the quieter ones, the ones where I could go for hours without seeing another person. I found it on a website that listed hidden gems in hiking. The post made it sound perfect, long, a bit challenging, but nothing too extreme. It was supposed to have a few streams, shaded areas, and an overlook at the end that gave a wide view of the valley. Sounded ideal. I got up early that morning, packed my bag into my car, and drove out. The parking lot was almost empty. Only one other car was there, an old truck with dusty windows. I assumed it belonged to someone already on the trail. I parked, stretched, and tightened the straps of my backpack. I checked my shoes, laced them tighter, and started walking toward the trailhead. The first part of the trail was simple and peaceful. The path was clear, and I walked at a steady pace. The morning air was still cool, and the forest around me was quiet except for the sound of insects buzzing and birds calling out. The dirt crunched under my boots. I kept a steady rhythm, breathing evenly, enjoying the smell of pine and dry leaves. About 2 miles in, the path started to slope upward. My legs warmed up, and sweat began to build on my back. I drank from my water bottle and kept moving. The sun was rising higher now, and I could feel its weight through the trees. The shade that had been thick earlier was thinning as beams of sunlight broke through the canopy. The trail grew steeper, and soon I was climbing switchbacks. My thighs burned, and I slowed down a bit. I took small breaks every now and then to drink water and catch my breath. I noticed how dry the air felt. Even though I was sweating, it evaporated quickly. My lips felt a little cracked, and I licked them often. Hours passed like this. I stopped to eat a protein bar, sitting on a rock with a nice view of the trees below. I checked my map to see how far I had gone. By my estimate, I was halfway to the overlook. That gave me confidence. I got up and pushed on. By noon, the heat was heavy. The air felt thick, and the sun burned down. The shade from the trees helped, but not much. I drank more water than I had planned. My 2 bottles were draining fast, and I realized I would have to use the water filter at a stream soon. The problem was, I hadn't seen any streams yet. The map showed there should be one crossing the trail, but I must have passed it without noticing, or it had dried up. I kept going, a little worried but not panicked. I told myself I'd find another one ahead, but the further I went, the drier everything looked. The plants were brittle, the dirt loose. Even the air seemed lifeless. Around mid-afternoon, my legs felt heavy, and my head buzzed slightly. I slowed my pace, wiping sweat from my forehead. I checked my bottles. Only one was left, half full. My mouth was already dry. That was when I realized I had made a mistake. I had underestimated how much water I would need in this heat. Normally, I'd be fine with what I brought, but the weather was different this time. The trail felt harsher, the sun unforgiving. I thought about turning back, but then I remembered how far I had already come. I told myself it would be shorter to push forward, reach the overlook, and maybe find water somewhere along the way. I forced myself to keep walking. The trail got rougher. Roots stuck out, and rocks made my steps uneven. My legs ached, and my head felt heavier with each step. The heat wrapped around me like a blanket I couldn't pull off. My shirt clung to my skin, soaked through. By late afternoon, I knew I was in trouble. My water bottle was almost empty, I tried to ration it, taking only small sips, but my body screamed for more. My lips cracked deeper, and my tongue felt thick. Each breath was harder than the last. Finally, I saw a patch of wet ground near the trail. My heart jumped. I scrambled down the slope, stumbling, almost falling, and reached the spot. It was only a trickle of water coming out from between some rocks, but to me it looked like life itself. I pulled out my filter, filled my bottle, and drank deeply. The water was cool, and I felt alive again. For a few minutes, I sat there, letting my body calm down, drinking slowly but steadily. My head cleared a little, and I thought I'd be fine now. I refilled both bottles, packed up, and started back on the trail. But the relief didn't last long. The sun was dropping lower, but the heat still clung to the air. My legs felt weaker, and my body was slower to respond. I pushed myself harder, knowing I still had to reach the overlook or turn back. When I finally reached the top, the view was breathtaking, but I barely cared. I could see the whole valley below, stretching endlessly, but my body only wanted rest. I dropped my pack, sat on a rock, and drank again. My head throbbed, and I felt dizzy every time I stood up. That was when I realized another mistake. I had lost track of time. The sun was already starting to dip lower, and I had at least 5 or 6 miles to hike back down. My legs were tired, my body drained, and I wasn't sure I could move fast enough before dark. I grabbed my pack and started down, trying to pick up speed. But the trail that had been difficult going up was even worse going down. My knees buckled, and the rocks shifted under my boots. I stumbled several times, catching myself on trees. My flashlight was in my pack, but I knew it wouldn't last forever if I had to use it in full darkness. The forest changed as the sun sank. Shadows stretched across the trail, and the air cooled, but my sweat turned cold against my skin. Every sound made me tense. The crack of branches, the rustle of leaves. I was alone, and I knew it. Halfway down, I slipped on a loose rock and went crashing onto my side. Pain shot up my leg, and I gasped, clutching my knee. I lay there for a moment, stunned, breathing hard. When I tried to stand, pain stabbed deep in my knee. I could still put weight on it, but every step was sharp and unsteady. I had no choice but to keep moving, slower now, limping, every step sending a jolt through my body. The sky turned darker, and soon I had to pull out my flashlight. Its beam lit the narrow path, but beyond that, everything was black. Hours passed like that. My knee throbbed, my water ran low again, and my body begged for rest. I fought to stay focused, counting each step, pushing myself to keep moving. I thought of the empty parking lot, my car sitting there, the safety of its seat. That image kept me going. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the faint outline of the trailhead sign in the distance. My heart lifted. I hobbled faster, my flashlight flickering as the battery weakened. The pain in my knee was almost unbearable, but I didn't stop. When I stepped into the clearing and saw my car waiting there, I almost cried. I dragged myself to it, unlocked the door, and fell into the seat. My body shook, my throat dry, my head pounding, but I was alive. I sat there for a long time, breathing, drinking the last drops of water. I thought about how close I had come to collapsing out there, how unprepared I had been for something as simple as heat and distance. That night, driving home on the empty road, I promised myself I would never again underestimate a trail. I would never again take only the bare minimum of supplies, never again assume nature was safe just because it was beautiful. That hike had shown me how quickly things could go wrong, and how small and fragile I really was out there. I had been planning the hike for months. I had read about the mountain trail on a few local websites, and the idea of finally taking it on stayed in my head. It wasn't the most popular trail in the region. Most hikers preferred the well-marked routes closer to the main highway. The mountain trail I picked was quieter, longer, and harder to follow, but that was exactly what drew me to it. I wanted something that felt untouched, something that demanded effort. I told myself I was ready for it, that I was experienced enough, But once I was deep in the mountain, I realized how much I had underestimated both the land and myself. I started early in the morning. The sun was still low, the sky pale, and the air carried the kind of coolness that always disappears once midday comes around. My backpack felt heavier than usual, even though I had packed carefully. I carried a tent, a sleeping bag, food, water, a small first aid kit, and some other basic gear. I didn't bring anything excessive, but the weight pressed on my shoulders all the same. I told myself it was fine, that after a few miles I'd get used to it. The first few hours went well. The path was wide at the start, gravel crunching under my boots, the forest opening up on both sides. Trees stood tall and close together, their trunks thick, their leaves filtering the sunlight so that the ground was a mix of shadows and patches of gold. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and every step I took filled me with a quiet kind of excitement. I liked the stillness. I liked knowing that I was away from the noise of town, away from the clutter of cars and buildings. I felt free, but the deeper I went, the more the trail changed. It narrowed and rose, bending into uneven switchbacks that wound up the side of the slope. The ground was no longer gravel but dirt, covered in roots and rocks that made walking slower. My boots caught against them more than once, and I had to steady myself with my hands on nearby trunks. The trees grew denser, and sometimes the trail almost disappeared under fallen leaves and brush. I checked my map often, but the paper seemed less and less useful the further I climbed. I told myself not to worry, that the trail was still there, just harder to see. By noon, the sun was high but hidden behind thick clouds. The air shifted. It wasn't just warm anymore. It was heavy, as if pressing against me. The forest grew quiet. Even the birds that had filled the morning with chirps and calls seemed to have gone somewhere else. My own footsteps and my breathing were the only sounds. It was strange how silence could be so loud. Every crunch, every scrape of my boot against stone seemed to echo longer than it should. I kept moving, though slower. My shoulders ached from the straps of my pack. Sweat clung to my shirt and ran down my back, sticking the fabric to my skin. I reached a part of the trail that cut across a steep hillside, the drop on one side hidden by bushes but deep enough to make me nervous. I kept my eyes forward, moving carefully, planting each step before shifting my weight. The dirt here was loose, crumbling in small slides under my boots. I slipped once, my heart hammering as I caught myself against a root. I stood still for a while after that, steadying my breathing, telling myself to stay calm. The trail leveled out again after that section, and I pushed forward. I told myself I would stop soon to rest and eat, but every time I thought about it, I decided to keep going just a little further. I didn't want to stop in the thick of the forest where the air felt so close. I wanted somewhere more open. Finally, I reached a small clearing. The ground flattened out, and there was enough space to set down my pack. I sat on a fallen log, stretched my legs, and ate a granola bar and some jerky. The food was dry in my mouth, and I washed it down with water, trying not to drink too much at once. I still had several hours of hiking ahead of me, and I couldn't afford to waste it. After resting, I moved on again. The trail climbed higher, the trees thinning in some places to show glimpses of the valley below. I could see how far I had come, and it gave me a mix of pride and unease. Pride because the view was incredible, a wide sweep of green forest stretching out to the horizon. Unease because I realized just how far I was from anything familiar. If something went wrong, there was no quick way back. The unease grew stronger when I noticed how different the trail looked now. The dirt path split in several places, thin tracks branching off and fading into the undergrowth. My map didn't show these. I tried to pick the one that seemed most used, but even then I wasn't sure. The branches scratched against my arms, and the slope of the trail didn't feel right. Still, I pressed on, hoping it would even out. Didn't. Instead, the ground grew rougher, scattered with rocks, some loose, some embedded. My boots slid often, and I had to crouch to steady myself. At one point, I reached a section where the trail almost vanished completely, replaced by a scatter of stones that seemed to lead upward. I hesitated, but I climbed it anyway, my breath loud in my ears. By the time I reached the top, my legs burned, and I was drenched in sweat. Up there, the forest seemed different. The trees were older, thicker, their branches twisting together high above. The light was dim, even though I knew it was still afternoon. The air felt stiller than before, heavier, as though it was holding its breath. The silence was so complete that I could hear the pounding of my heart and the rush of blood in my ears. I swallowed hard and kept moving. Hours passed like this. I walked, stopped, checked my map, checked my compass, and walked again. The trail came and went, sometimes clear, sometimes almost gone. I grew more and more certain that I had lost it entirely, though I kept telling myself I hadn't. My water was running low. My shoulders and back ached. My legs felt heavy. A part of me wanted to turn back, but another part insisted it was too late. I was already deep in, and turning back without knowing where I had gone off course could be worse. By late afternoon, I found a flat area near a cluster of boulders where I decided to set up camp. My hands shook as I worked with the tent poles, my muscles tired and clumsy. I finally got the tent standing, rolled out my sleeping bag, and sat inside for a while. The fabric walls gave a thin sense of safety, though I knew it was only an illusion. Outside, the forest pressed in from every direction. I cooked a small meal with my camp stove, the smell of food faint in the still air. I ate quickly, trying not to think about how isolated I was. When the sun went down, darkness came fast. The forest swallowed the light, and soon my headlamp was the only thing cutting through it. I stayed in the tent, listening. Every small sound outside made me tense. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the faint scurrying of something moving across the ground. I told myself it was only animals, nothing more. Still, I lay awake for a long time, staring at the thin fabric above me, waiting for sleep that didn't come. When I finally drifted off, I woke again not long after. A noise had pulled me out of sleep. I lay still, holding my breath, straining to hear. It was faint, but steady, the crunch of footsteps on leaves. My chest tightened. The sound wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I turned off my headlamp, lying in the dark, listening. The footsteps moved, sometimes pausing, sometimes starting again. I couldn't tell if they were circling or passing by. Time stretched. My throat felt dry, and my hands were damp with sweat. Eventually, the sound faded. I waited longer, too afraid to move. Only when silence returned did I let out my breath. I didn't sleep much after that. I dozed in short stretches, waking at every noise. When dawn came, I packed up quickly, too uneasy to linger. My water was nearly gone, and I knew I had to find a way back. But every direction looked the same: trees, rocks, shadows. My compass pointed north, but north didn't tell me which way the trail lay. I picked a direction and started moving, hoping I would recognize something. The day dragged on with no sign of the main trail. The forest grew denser, the slope steeper. My stomach ached with hunger, though I rationed my food carefully. My lips cracked from thirst, and every step felt heavier than the last. Fear sat in my chest like a stone. I tried to keep calm, but the thought of being truly lost gnawed at me. Every time I thought I heard water, I followed the sound, only to find nothing but wind moving through the trees. By late afternoon, I stumbled upon a dried creek bed. The rocks were smooth, worn by water that no longer flowed. I followed it, thinking it might lead me downhill toward a river. My boots slipped often, and I scraped my hands on the stones, but I kept going. Hours passed, and still there was no water, only the empty channel twisting deeper into the forest. My throat burned with thirst. When night came again, I set up camp in the creek bed. I was too exhausted to care about comfort. I spread my sleeping bag on the rocks and lay down, my body aching all over. I barely ate. My head spun. I started that hike with nothing but excitement in me. It had been weeks since I'd gotten a full day outdoors, away from work, away from noise, away from people. The trail I picked wasn't one of the famous ones. It wasn't crowded. That was exactly what I wanted. It was a long backcountry trail that wound deep into the forest, away from paved roads and campsites. I had looked at the map so many times before going that I thought I knew it by memory. The plan was simple. Hike in early, follow the loop through the ridge, stop by the small lake halfway through, and come out by evening. It was marked as a strenuous trail on the guide, around 14 miles round trip, but I felt confident. I packed enough food and water for the day, an extra layer, my small survival kit, a flashlight, and a map. Everything felt under control when I parked the car at the small pull-off where the trail started. The air was cool that morning. The sun hadn't fully burned through the mist that lingered between the trees. The forest smelled damp, earthy, rich with pine. My boots crunched softly over wet leaves as I moved along. I walked at a steady pace, trying not to push too hard early. For the first hour, the hike felt perfect. The trail was clear, the air crisp, and the silence peaceful except for the calls of birds and the occasional sound of something moving through the underbrush. The deeper I went, the less I thought about anything but the woods around me. Time seemed to stretch. I remember pausing to drink water at a small stream that cut across the path. The water ran clear, tumbling over smooth stones, and I crouched there listening to the sound. It was the kind of place that made you forget the rest of the world. By midday, I reached the ridge. From there, the view spread wide. Forested hills rolled into the distance. No towns, no houses, nothing but endless green and gray rock. The wind was stronger up there, carrying a colder bite. I ate some trail mix, checked my map, and kept going. I wanted to make the lake by early afternoon. It was somewhere after that ridge that things started to change. The trail grew less distinct. At first, I thought it was just the terrain. Some parts looked washed out from rain, other parts covered with loose rock. The blazes painted on trees were older here, faded, harder to see. I had to stop often to be sure I was on the right track. Each time I found a marker, I felt relief, but I could sense how remote this section was compared to the beginning. The forest grew thicker. The light dimmed, even though it was still afternoon. I felt like I had stepped into a different world, cut off from the open sky of the ridge. The silence pressed harder. I couldn't hear birds anymore, only the occasional rustle from something moving unseen in the brush. My footsteps sounded too loud in that quiet. When I finally reached the lake, I felt both relief and unease. The water lay still, dark, ringed by tall pines that blocked much of the sun. It wasn't a large lake, more like a wide pond, but it was beautiful in a lonely way. I sat on a rock by the edge, ate another snack, and tried to relax. I should have turned back then, retraced my steps, gone out the way I came. But the map showed the loop continuing around the far side of the lake, leading back to the trailhead from another direction. It seemed simple enough. I started around the lake, following what looked like the trail. The ground was softer here, muddy in places, covered in moss. The path wound tight against the water, sometimes disappearing under roots. I slowed my pace, scanning ahead for any sign of the next marker. That was when I noticed how easy it was to lose the trail entirely. The forest floor was littered with fallen branches, old leaves, and patches of growth that looked no different than the worn path. At one point, I had to backtrack, realizing I had walked into nothing but brush. The deeper I went, the more uncertain I became. I hadn't seen a trail marker in a long while. The ground rose and dipped in strange ways. I tried to line up the direction with the map, but in the dense trees it was hard to judge. The lake was no longer in view. All I could see was forest pressing in on all sides. I kept moving, telling myself I would find the next blaze soon. But every step seemed to carry me further into uncertainty. The silence grew heavier. My heart began to beat faster each time I looked around and realized the trees looked the same in every direction. I stopped more than once, breathing hard, trying to convince myself I wasn't lost. When I finally admitted it, a cold wave ran through me. I was lost. I pulled out the map again, studied it under the gray light, but it didn't help. Without a clear landmark, without knowing exactly where I had strayed, the lines on paper were useless. I tried listening for the lake, but the woods muffled everything. I tried climbing a small rise, hoping to spot water through the trees, but all I saw was more endless forest. I told myself not to panic, The trail had to be nearby. I decided to pick one direction and walk straight, slow and careful, marking my way as I went. I broke small branches, stacked a few stones, anything that could help me retrace if I had to. The forest floor was uneven, covered in holes and rotting logs. I stumbled more than once. My boots sank into soft patches of ground. Sweat ran down my back, though the air was cool. An hour passed, then another. Still no sign of the trail. My water bottle grew lighter. Hunger pressed in. I ate another bar, but it felt dry in my mouth, hard to swallow. My throat was tight. The light had changed too. The sky above the trees was dimmer, shifting toward evening. That was when the unease sharpened into fear. The idea of being stuck out here overnight clawed at me. I had a flashlight, yes, but no tent, no sleeping bag. The temperature would drop. I thought about animals too. Not anything supernatural, just the real ones. Bears, coyotes, even snakes in the undergrowth. I had read enough to know they usually avoid people, but being alone out here made the thought heavier. I pushed harder, walking faster than before. My legs ached. Branches scratched at my arms. I tripped over roots, caught myself on trunks, cursed under my breath. I tried shouting once, just to hear my own voice, but it sounded swallowed by the trees. No one was out here to hear it anyway. The forest seemed endless. Every rise I climbed only revealed more hills and more trees. The silence was broken only by my own breathing and the pounding of my boots. I started to feel watched, though I knew it was only my nerves. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was close, moving when I moved, hiding when I stopped. When the sun began to fall, the shadows lengthened. The trees turned black against the dim sky. I knew I had to find a place to stop before it was fully dark. I didn't want to keep stumbling blindly and wear myself out more. I found a small clearing, just a patch where the ground was flatter and the trees thinner, and sat down on a log. My body shook with exhaustion. I forced myself to eat a little more, drink the last of my water. The quiet pressed down until I could hear nothing but the pounding of my heart. Night in the forest is different from anything else. The darkness is total. My flashlight cut a narrow cone of white, but beyond that was black, thick and endless. Every sound jumped out. Snaps of branches, rustling leaves, the cry of some bird or animal in the distance. Each noise set me on edge, made me clutch the flashlight tighter. I didn't sleep, couldn't. I just sat there, shivering, waiting for the night to pass. By morning, my mind felt dull, heavy from fatigue. The cold had seeped into me. My mouth was dry, my stomach hollow. I knew I couldn't sit there any longer. I had to move. I picked a direction and started walking again. Slower now, every step aching. Hours dragged. My legs burned. My head throbbed. I thought I heard water once, a trickle through the trees. But when I followed it, I only found a swampy patch where the ground sucked at my boots. My frustration twisted into desperation. I wanted to scream, but held it in, saving the strength. The second day blurred into a haze of stumbling steps, constant searching, endless trees. At one point, I thought I saw a cut log that looked man-made, and my chest leapt with hope. But when I reached it, I realized it was just a storm-fallen trunk. I rationed what little I had left to chew, but by afternoon, even that was gone. My lips cracked, my hands shook. My mind kept circling the same thoughts. How stupid I had been to keep going. How easy it would have been to turn back at the lake. By the time night came again, I felt broken. My flashlight still worked, but weaker now. I sat against a tree, too drained to even keep watch. I closed my eyes for moments at a time, jerking awake at each sound. My thoughts drifted between hope and dread, wondering if I would ever find the trail again. It was the third morning when things changed. I was staggering downhill, barely able to keep moving, when I heard a sound that cut through everything else. It was faint, but steady, the rush of water. I had been planning the hike for weeks before I finally decided to go. It was the end of summer, and I wanted one last long hike before the weather turned. Most people I knew liked sticking to the popular trails, the ones where you'd run into other hikers every half hour and where the paths were clearly marked and easy to follow. But I wanted something quieter, more remote. I had been looking at maps, reading about old Forest Service roads, and checking satellite images. That was how I found the trail that eventually became a mistake I'll never forget. It wasn't even an official trail anymore. From what I could piece together, it had been used decades ago by fire crews and hunters, but it had since been abandoned. There were no signs pointing to it, no trail markers, nothing on the newer maps. But if you knew where to look, you could still see a faint line cutting through the trees. That was what caught my eye. I liked the idea of being somewhere that almost no one else went. The thought of having an entire valley to myself sounded perfect. I packed carefully. I brought a large hiking backpack with enough food for 3 days, even though I only planned to spend one night out there. I wanted to be safe in case I got delayed. I packed a tent, sleeping bag, stove, extra water bottles, water filter, first aid kit, and spare batteries for my headlamp. I brought 2 knives, a bear spray can, and a small emergency beacon that could send out a distress signal if I needed it. I felt confident, maybe even overconfident. The morning I left, the sky was gray but calm. The forecast had mentioned a chance of storms late the next day, but that seemed far enough away. I parked my car on the shoulder of a gravel forest road, where there was just enough room to pull over without blocking anything. When I stepped out and shouldered my heavy pack, I remember noticing how quiet it was. No traffic, no people, not even the hum of power lines. Just the wind moving slowly through tall trees. The first part of the hike wasn't bad. I followed a faint track that wound downhill through pines and firs, the kind of trail that clearly hadn't been maintained but was still visible if you paid attention. The air smelled of damp earth and resin. Birds called out every so often, and I even saw deer tracks in the softer soil. I felt excited, like I had found a secret place. As the day went on, the trail grew harder to follow. Fallen logs blocked parts of it, and sections had been swallowed by brush. I had to use my map and compass more than once to make sure I was headed the right way. Every time I stopped, I listened, and the silence pressed in. It wasn't the kind of quiet you find near town, where you can still hear distant roads or dogs barking. This was a heavy quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind or the snap of a branch far off. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing. It looked like it might have been a camp years ago, with a ring of stones that could have been used for fires. I dropped my pack there and decided it would make a good place to set up for the night. I pitched my tent near the tree line, filtered water from a nearby stream, and cooked a simple meal. The sun dipped behind the ridgeline, and the shadows stretched long across the clearing. I sat for a while, eating slowly, taking it all in. That first night, I lay in my tent listening to the forest. The silence was deep, but not empty. I could hear faint sounds now and then, the movement of small animals in the underbrush, the creak of branches, and the occasional distant snap that could have been anything. I wasn't afraid, not yet. I told myself it was all normal forest noise. Still, I kept my bear spray close by just in case. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke early. My plan was to follow the trail further down into the valley, then loop back toward the forest road the next day. I packed up camp, shouldered my bag, and started moving. At first, the trail was manageable again, though narrow. But as the hours passed, it grew rougher. There were stretches where I had to push through chest-high brush, places where the ground had eroded into gullies, and areas covered with so much deadfall that I lost track of where the trail even was. I had to stop again and again to make sure I wasn't wandering off course. Sometime in the early afternoon, I came across something strange. The trail split around a wide fallen tree, and on the far side, I saw what looked like an old half-buried shoe. I walked closer and realized it really was a boot, so worn and rotted that the leather had gone soft and the laces were gone. It looked like it had been there for decades. Beside it, almost hidden in leaves, was a rusty tin can with faded writing on it. I crouched down and studied them. Part of me wanted to believe they had just been dropped by a hunter long ago, but something about them felt off. They were in the middle of nowhere, far from where most people would have gone. I stood there longer than I should have, then forced myself to keep walking. Not long after that, I began to feel watched. It was subtle at first, just that prickly feeling you get when you sense eyes on you. I stopped a few times and looked around, scanning the trees, but I saw nothing. Everything was still. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks in the silence. By evening, I realized I had gone further than I meant to. The trail had pulled me deeper into the valley, and turning back would take longer than I wanted. I decided to camp again, though I felt uneasy about it. I found a small flat spot near a ridge, far from water but dry and clear. I set up my tent quickly, made a small meal, and tried to relax. But the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. If anything, it was worse. Every time I looked toward the trees, I expected to see someone standing there. That night was harder. The forest noises seemed louder, sharper. I heard what sounded like heavy steps on the ridge above my tent, slow and deliberate. My heart hammered in my chest, and I grabbed my bear spray, clutching it in the dark. I told myself it was just an elk or maybe a deer, but the steps didn't sound like hooves. They sounded like feet, human feet. I hardly slept at all. Every time I drifted off, I woke again to some noise. The snap of wood, the crunch of leaves, the whisper of movement too close. At one point, I swore I heard breathing right outside the tent. Deep, steady breathing, like someone standing still just beyond the thin nylon wall. I held my breath, frozen, waiting. It went on for what felt like minutes, then slowly faded. I didn't move until the sky began to lighten. When morning came, I packed fast. I didn't eat, didn't linger. I just wanted to get out. I checked my compass and started back the way I thought I'd come. But the trail wasn't clear anymore. I followed what looked like the right path, but after half an hour, I realized it wasn't leading where it should. I turned, adjusted, tried again. Still wrong. The more I searched, the more the forest closed in. Everything looked the same: endless trees, slopes, gullies. Panic started creeping in. My map didn't match what I was seeing. The faint trails twisted, split, and disappeared. At one point, I came across a tree with strange marks on it, shallow cuts in the bark that didn't look natural. They were too straight, too deliberate. I stared at them, wondering who had made them and why. Then I noticed another tree nearby with the same marks. Then another. They formed a line, leading deeper into the woods. I didn't follow them. I turned the other way, forcing myself to keep moving, to focus on finding the ridgeline. I knew if I could just get high enough, I'd see where the road was, but the forest fought me at every step. Thick brush tore at my clothes. Slopes crumbled under my boots. Hours passed, and I grew exhausted, my legs burning, my throat dry. I rationed my water carefully, but it was running low. By late afternoon, I stumbled into another clearing. In the center of it was something I'll never forget. An old fire pit, long cold, surrounded by broken glass, rusted cans, and scraps of tarp. And beside it, leaning against a tree, was another boot. This one was newer, not rotted like the first. It still had laces. I froze, my stomach twisting. Someone had been here recently, or at least within the past few years. The feeling of being watched was back, heavier than before. My skin prickled, and I scanned the tree line, certain I'd see someone, but the clearing was empty. I backed away slowly, then turned and left as fast as I could without running. The sun dropped low, and shadows swallowed the forest. I had no choice but to camp again. I picked a spot far from the clearing, hidden among dense trees, and set up without cooking. I sat in the dark with my bear spray in hand, too scared to use my light for long. Every sound felt amplified. I heard sticks breaking nearby, soft rustles, and more than once what sounded like faint footsteps circling. I didn't sleep. I sat awake all night, heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. By morning, I was shaking with exhaustion. My only thought was to keep moving, to find a way out. It took nearly the entire day, but by sheer luck and stubbornness, I finally hit a ridge that looked familiar. I climbed, pushing myself until I reached the top, and there, in the distance, I had been looking forward to the hiking trip for weeks. I needed to get out of the city, away from noise and distractions, and into the kind of silence that only exists deep in the woods. I chose a trail I had never been on before, one that was listed as moderate but long, winding through dense forest and rocky terrain before circling back to a small parking lot. The plan was simple: leave early in the morning, hike all day, and get back before sunset. The morning air was cool and heavy with dew when I stepped out of my car. The sky was still pale from dawn, and there was a soft mist hanging over the treetops. I strapped on my pack, adjusted the straps, and locked my car before heading toward the start of the trail. The wooden sign was old and faded, its letters barely readable, but the arrow pointing into the thick woods was clear enough. The dirt under my boots was damp, and the scent of pine filled the air. The trail started easy, just a flat dirt path surrounded by tall trees that blocked most of the morning light. My boots crunched on fallen leaves, and every so often, a bird darted across the path. I felt good, calm, like I was exactly where I needed to be. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Soon the only sound was my own footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. As the hours passed, the trail grew narrower and steeper. Roots twisted out of the ground, and rocks jutted from the soil, forcing me to watch every step carefully. I stopped now and then to sip water and eat a small snack. The air stayed cool, but the climb made me sweat. My shirt clung to my back, and my thighs burned with the effort. Still, I pushed forward, eager to see where the path would take me. At one point, I came across a fork in the trail. The map I had printed from home didn't show it. One path curved gently upward, the other dipped down into a darker part of the forest. I stood there for a long minute, listening, trying to decide. The upward path looked safer, but the downward one looked more interesting. After a moment, I chose the downward path, telling myself it couldn't be too different. The air grew colder as I descended. The trees pressed closer together, their branches heavy and low, blocking out more of the light. The soil was damp, almost muddy, and I had to be careful not to slip. The smell of earth was stronger here, mixed with the faint scent of rotting leaves. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself it was nothing, just nerves from being in a new place. After what felt like an hour, I realized I hadn't seen another marker. Most trails had paint blazes or signs nailed to trees, but here there was nothing. I pulled out the map again, but it didn't help. The paper was wrinkled and damp from the sweat of my hands, and the lines didn't match what I was seeing. I shoved it back into my pocket and kept moving, hoping the trail would loop back soon. The ground grew steeper, and the forest grew darker. I had to climb over fallen logs and push through thick undergrowth. My legs ached, and my shoulders hurt from the weight of the pack. At one point, I slipped on a patch of wet leaves and fell hard on my side. Pain shot through my ribs, and I lay there for a minute, gasping. When I finally stood, I brushed dirt and leaves from my clothes and checked myself. Nothing seemed broken, but the ache in my side didn't go away. By now, I knew I was off trail. The path had faded into little more than trampled ground, and even that disappeared behind me when I turned to look. I cursed myself for taking the fork. My phone had no signal, and the battery was already down by nearly half from me checking the map app earlier. I stuffed it back into my pocket and tried to calm myself. I decided to keep moving in one direction, telling myself that eventually, I'd hit another trail or maybe a road. The ground sloped downward, so I followed it, hoping it would lead to water. People always said water led to people. The forest floor grew marshy, and soon I was slogging through mud that sucked at my boots. Mosquitoes buzzed around my face, landing on my skin whenever I slowed down. I slapped at them, my frustration mounting. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, then began its slow drop. The light turned golden, filtering through the trees in long beams, and I felt panic rise in my chest. I hadn't planned to camp. I hadn't brought a tent, just a thin emergency blanket, some snacks, and a headlamp. The thought of being stuck overnight in this place filled me with dread. Every rustle in the bushes sounded too close, too deliberate. I pushed harder, forcing my sore legs to keep moving. Finally, I reached a stream. The water was clear, shallow, and cold. I filled my bottle and drank greedily, then splashed my face. The coolness calmed me a little, but when I looked around, I realized how alone I really was. No trails, no sounds of people, just endless trees. The sun was sinking fast. The golden light turned orange, then red, then faded into the dim gray of evening. I pulled out my headlamp and strapped it on, but its weak circle of light only made the darkness around me feel heavier. I needed to find a place to stop. I moved along the stream until I found a patch of ground that was a little drier, with fewer rocks. I dropped my pack, pulled out the emergency blanket, and wrapped it around myself as the temperature dropped. The sounds of the forest grew sharper in the night. The croak of frogs, the constant whine of insects, the snap of branches somewhere too far to see. My ribs throbbed where I had fallen earlier, and every time I shifted, the pain reminded me how fragile I was out here. Sleep came in short bursts. I would close my eyes, only to jolt awake at some sound. My body shivered under the thin blanket, and the hours dragged by. At one point, I heard something splash in the stream. I froze, holding my breath, listening as the sound moved downstream. I never saw what it was, but my heart didn't stop racing until long after the sound was gone. When dawn finally came, the relief was overwhelming. The pale light through the trees felt like safety, even though nothing had really changed. My body was stiff and sore, my clothes damp, my stomach empty. I forced myself to eat a protein bar and drink more water, then packed up and started walking again. I stuck to the stream, reasoning that it had to lead somewhere. The day dragged on, each hour blending into the next. The sun rose, burned hot, and began to fall again, and still there was no sign of a trail or road. My legs trembled with exhaustion, and my lips were cracked from thirst, even with the stream nearby. That second night was worse than the first. My headlamp battery was almost dead, so I sat in near darkness, wrapped in the blanket, listening to the forest around me. My ribs ached, my stomach cramped, and I felt the first sharp stab of real fear that I might not make it out. The third day, I stumbled across something that froze me in place. An old fire ring, blackened stones arranged in a circle. Nearby, there were scraps of rusted cans and a broken glass bottle. It wasn't recent, but it meant people had been here once. Hope surged through me, and I pushed forward with renewed energy. By late afternoon, I heard a new sound. Faint at first, almost lost under the buzz of insects. But as I kept moving, it grew clearer. The distant hum of traffic. My heart leapt. I scrambled through the undergrowth, ignoring the scratches and bruises, following the sound until I finally burst out of the trees and onto the edge of a narrow road. Cars sped past, their tires hissing on asphalt. I stood there on the shoulder, filthy, shaking, my clothes torn and my face streaked with dirt and sweat. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. I waved at the first car I saw, but it sped by. The second one slowed, then stopped, and I staggered toward it. I had made it out. The hike that was supposed to be simple had turned into 3 days of fear, pain, and exhaustion. My body was battered, my mind drained, but I was alive. I learned then how quickly things could turn bad in the woods, how one small choice, a wrong turn, could spiral into something that nearly killed me. I never looked at hiking the same way again. I started my hike early in the morning, long before the sun was fully out. The air was cool, the kind that feels damp and sits heavy in your lungs. My backpack was loaded with the usual things: water bottles, some food, a headlamp, a small first aid kit, a thin sleeping bag rolled up and tied on top. I had chosen a trail that wound deep into the forest and stretched far past the areas most people hiked. It was meant to be a long 2-day loop, a route that wasn't too dangerous but also wasn't busy. I wanted to be alone with the trees and the silence. The first stretch was easy. The path was wide and worn down from many boots. I passed the wooden signs that gave warnings about bears, mountain lions, and dehydration. I had read them before but always gave them a glance. The trail slowly narrowed as it pushed further in, the dirt damp and marked with the prints of deer and raccoons. Sunlight broke through in thin stripes, catching on spider webs and making the wet leaves shine like glass. I kept a steady pace, my boots crunching on gravel and twigs, the straps of my pack creaking slightly with each step. Hours went by. I stopped every now and then to sip water, leaning against a tree and listening to the quiet. There were no voices, no distant sounds of traffic or people. Only the forest, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the occasional call of a bird. It was peaceful but also heavy. The deeper I went, the more the silence felt like it was pressing down. By midday, I had covered a good stretch and reached a point where the trail climbed up through switchbacks. The climb was long and tiring, my legs burning and sweat rolling down my face. I pulled off my pack at the top and sat on a rock, breathing hard. The view was wide. The forest spread out below like a green ocean, endless in every direction. I saw no rooftops, no roads, only the endless trees. I ate a granola bar, drank more water, and adjusted my pack before pressing on. The trail narrowed even more past the climb. Roots tangled across the dirt, and in some places, small streams cut through, so I had to step carefully. I checked my map often. I wasn't lost, but I knew this loop had long stretches without clear markings. The plan was to make it close to a clearing marked near the far side of the loop before stopping for the night. I wanted to set up my small bivy sack there and rest before finishing the rest the next day. The afternoon shadows grew long. The air cooled, the forest floor growing dim. I walked faster, trying to cover ground before it was too late. The trail cut through valleys and climbed ridges, and every so often I thought I heard something behind me. A snapping branch, a shift of weight in the underbrush. Each time I stopped and looked, the forest was still. Could have been deer or the wind, but the feeling of being watched began to creep in. I told myself it was just the stillness getting to me. By the time I reached the clearing, my shoulders ached from the weight of my pack. The spot was small and flat, a break in the trees where grass grew higher and the ground was soft. I dropped my pack, stretched my arms, and sat for a while. My shirt was damp with sweat, sticking to my back, and my throat felt dry even after drinking. I stayed there until the light faded further, then pulled out the bivy sack and unrolled it. The night came quickly under the trees. I ate some jerky and trail mix, drank more water, and checked my map again by the fading light. Everything looked right. I was where I was supposed to be. Still, unease prickled at me. The forest was silent in a way that felt wrong. No birds, no distant owls, not even the rustle of animals. Only the wind whispering through the tops of the trees. When I finally lay down, the ground felt cold beneath me. I pulled the bivy tight around my shoulders and listened. Every creak, every shift in the woods made me open my eyes. I told myself I needed sleep. I needed rest to finish the hike tomorrow. But my body stayed tense, every nerve waiting. I must have drifted off at some point, because when I woke, the air was colder and the moon was high. Something had woken me. I lay still, listening. There it was, the crunch of leaves. Slow, heavy steps not far from where I lay. My heart started pounding. I stayed silent, barely breathing, staring at the thin opening of my bivy. The steps grew closer, then paused. The sound of breathing reached me, heavy and steady. It wasn't an animal moving fast through the brush. It was something slow, deliberate. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. Eventually, the steps moved away, fading into the trees. I lay awake long after that, my body stiff with fear. I told myself it was a deer, maybe an elk, something large, moving carefully. But deep down, I knew the pattern of the steps. They were too even, too controlled. They sounded like a person. When morning finally came, I packed up quickly. My stomach felt sick from nerves, and I barely ate. I pushed hard on the trail, wanting to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. The forest felt different now. Every shadow looked like it was hiding something. Every noise made me stop and listen. Midday came and went. My legs ached, my feet sore from the miles. I stopped only briefly to drink. My map showed that I was close to the loopback, but it was still far enough that I would need another night before reaching the trailhead. That thought filled me with dread. I didn't want to spend another night out there, not after the steps I heard. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in. The light dimmed early, and the wind picked up. I decided to stop near a ridge that had some flat ground. My body was too tired to go further. I set my bivvy close to a fallen log and gathered myself as best I could. I forced down more food, drank again, and sat with my back against the log as the sky grew dark. The night came colder. I pulled the bivvy tight and tried to close my eyes. My body ached, and exhaustion tugged at me, but my mind wouldn't let go. I lay awake, waiting. The sound came again, leaves shifting, branches snapping, the same slow, heavy steps moving closer through the dark. My mouth went dry. I clutched the small knife I carried, though I knew it wouldn't do much. The steps circled, slow, deliberate. My chest tightened. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The steps came close enough that I could make out the sound of weight pressing into the earth. Then silence. Long silence. I couldn't tell if whoever it was standing there, watching me. My muscles burned from staying so still. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe deeply. Hours seemed to pass like that, until finally, the forest quieted again. Morning light brought little relief. I felt drained, my nerves raw. My water was running low. I forced myself to eat, though the food felt heavy in my mouth. I packed quickly and set off again, my legs trembling from lack of rest. The hike back felt endless. Every sound behind me made me whip my head around. My pace quickened, my boots striking hard against the trail. My map said I was close, but the miles stretched on forever. When I finally saw the first signs of the wider path near the trailhead, my chest loosened. Relief hit me so strong I nearly stumbled. I pushed faster, the weight of fear lifting with every step. The wide dirt path opened, and soon I saw the faint outline of the sign near the entrance. I made it out. My body was exhausted, my feet blistered, but I was out. That night, back home, I lay in bed unable to sleep. Every creak of the house made me tense. My mind replayed the sound of those footsteps over and over. They weren't random, they weren't the sound of an animal. They were steady. They were paced like someone walking. The thought that haunted me most wasn't just that someone had followed me through the woods. It was that they never showed themselves, never tried to speak, never got closer than the edge of the dark. They only walked, circled, and watched, and I'll never know why. I had always liked being outdoors. Hiking gave me a kind of peace that I could never find anywhere else. The sound of the wind moving through tall trees, the crunch of dirt under my boots, the distant call of a bird or the trickle of a stream, all of it made me feel grounded in a way that nothing else could. I had done plenty of short hikes before, but this time I wanted something different. I wanted to push myself, go a little deeper, stay longer, test my limits in the wilderness. That was why I decided to do a solo overnight hike in a remote mountain area a few hours away from my home. I picked a trail I had read about online. It was not very popular, which appealed to me. I didn't like crowded trails where people passed by every few minutes. I wanted to feel alone, surrounded by nothing but trees, rock, and sky. The trail was said to lead to a ridge that overlooked a long valley, with a side route that dipped into a ravine where a small river ran. I told myself I would follow the main trail, maybe camp at the ridge, and then return the next day. I packed light but carefully: tent, sleeping bag, small stove, some dehydrated food, 2 liters of water, a filter pump, and the usual survival items like a lighter, headlamp, knife, and first aid kit. I left early in the morning, full of energy and excitement, without knowing that the choices I would make on that trail would bring me into one of the scariest experiences of my life. The first part of the hike was easy. The trail started wide and steady, weaving through pine trees with sunlight breaking through in patches. The air was cool, and the ground was still damp from last night's rain. I walked at a steady pace, enjoying the rhythm of my steps and the silence around me. After about 2 hours, I stopped to drink water and check my map. The trail ahead was supposed to climb toward the ridge, but I noticed a faint side path branching off toward the ravine. I hadn't planned on exploring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I would only follow it for a short while and then turn back to the main trail. That was the first mistake. The side path was narrow and uneven, covered with roots and rocks. It looked like it wasn't used much, but it was still clear enough to follow. I descended slowly, holding onto tree trunks for balance as the slope grew steeper. The deeper I went, the darker it became, with thick tree cover blocking most of the sun. I could hear the faint sound of water below, which pushed me forward. After another half hour, I finally reached the bottom of the ravine, where a shallow river snaked its way through smooth stones and fallen logs. It was beautiful down there, quiet and untouched. The air felt damp and cool, carrying the smell of wet earth and moss. I set my pack down on a rock, pulled out my filter pump, and refilled my water bottles from the river. The cold water tasted fresh and clean, and I sat there for a while just listening to the rush of the current. I thought about camping there for the night, but something in me hesitated. The ravine felt a little too closed in, the walls steep and high, the trees leaning over like they were pressing down. It gave me a strange sense of being trapped. I decided it was best to climb back up to the main trail and continue to the ridge as I had planned. When I started climbing back, I realized the problem. The path I had followed down didn't look the same going up. The slope was steep, and the loose dirt and rocks slid under my boots. I climbed higher, but every direction looked the same. Dense trees, tangled roots, no clear sign of the faint path I had come down on. I checked my map, but it wasn't much help. The map only showed the main trail and the general outline of the ravine, not the smaller offshoots or the details of the terrain. I tried retracing my steps, but within minutes I was uncertain if I was even going the right way. I climbed a small rise, thinking it might lead back, but instead it only led to another slope and more trees. The river below disappeared from sight, and with it went my last sense of direction. I wasn't panicked yet, but I felt the first sharp edge of unease cutting into me. I decided to stay calm and think. I still had daylight, food, and water. I told myself I just needed to climb steadily upward, since the main trail ran above the ravine. As long as I kept going up, I would eventually hit it. So I pushed forward, sweating, slipping, grabbing at branches for support. Hours seemed to pass like this, and every time I thought I was getting close to the top, another ridge rose ahead of me. My legs burned, my shoulders ached from the weight of my pack, and the forest seemed to close in tighter. By late afternoon, I stopped to rest. I had climbed so far that I couldn't even hear the river anymore, but I still hadn't found the main trail. My GPS on my phone had no signal. The battery was dropping fast, so I turned it off to save it. I chewed on a protein bar, my mouth dry even after sipping water. I tried to shake the thought that I might already be far off from where I should be. The ravine had twisted in ways I hadn't noticed while descending. I could be climbing up the wrong side altogether. The forest grew quieter as the day wore on. The light dimmed, shadows stretching long and thin. I felt an urge to keep moving, but I knew I had to stop soon and make camp before dark. I found a small flat spot between two large boulders and set up my tent. The ground was uneven, but it would do. I boiled some water, ate a hot meal, and sat there listening to the forest settle into night. It was a different world after dark. Every sound sharper, every crack of a branch or rustle in the undergrowth pulling my attention. I tried to tell myself it was just animals, nothing dangerous, but alone in the middle of nowhere, even the smallest noises felt threatening. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept waking up, my heart pounding, thinking I heard footsteps outside the tent. At one point I thought I saw the faint flicker of movement through the thin fabric, but when I held my breath and listened, there was only silence. Eventually I dozed off, but it was restless, broken sleep, and when morning came I felt even more drained. The second day was worse. I packed up and started climbing again, but now my legs were sore and my shoulders raw from the straps. I tried to keep a steady pace, but the terrain grew rougher. I slipped on loose dirt, cutting my hand on a rock. Blood smeared my palm, and I wrapped it with gauze from my first aid kit, annoyed at my own carelessness. The air grew hotter as the sun climbed, and I felt sweat soaking through my clothes. My water bottles were draining faster than I wanted, and the thought of going back down to refill at the river felt impossible. Hours passed, and still no sign of the trail. I started to feel a heavy pressure in my chest, not just from the climb, but from fear. I was lost, completely lost. The forest stretched endlessly, ridges and slopes repeating over and over like a maze with no exit. Every direction looked the same. I tried marking trees with my knife, thinking it might help me track my movements, but after a while the marks only reminded me of how far I had wandered without progress. That afternoon I heard something that froze me in place. At first it was faint, like a low crack of branches somewhere behind me. Then it came again, closer. It wasn't the random noise of an animal. It had rhythm, weight, like footsteps. I stood still, my breath held, my ears straining. The forest was silent for a moment, and then the sound came again, shifting through the undergrowth, too heavy to be a squirrel or rabbit. I didn't move for a long time, waiting, listening. Finally, the noise faded, leaving only the wind rustling the trees. I told myself it must have been a deer. That was the only thing that made sense. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. The way the sound had followed me, pausing when I paused, unsettled me in a way I couldn't shake. That night, I made camp earlier, too exhausted to push on. I found another flat spot near some rocks and set up my tent. As I ate a small meal, I felt exposed, like unseen eyes were watching me from the trees. The forest seemed to press closer around my little circle of light from the stove. I checked my knife, laid it close at hand inside the tent, and crawled into my sleeping bag. Sleep was worse that night. I kept waking up to noises, snapping branches, faint rustling. At one point, I thought I heard the sound of breathing outside the tent, steady and slow. I lay frozen, every muscle tense, staring at the thin fabric that separated me from the darkness outside. The sound didn't last long, but it left me shaking, my mind racing with possibilities. I never unzipped the tent to check. I couldn't bring myself to. By the third day, panic was clawing at me. My food supply was dropping, and my water was nearly gone. My body ached everywhere, and my throat burned from thirst. I forced myself to keep moving uphill, hoping I would eventually stumble across the trail or at least some landmark I could recognize. The sky clouded over that afternoon, and soon a light rain began to fall, soaking through the trees and making the ground slick. I slipped more than once, sliding down short slopes, scraping my arms and legs on rocks and branches. When the rain finally stopped, the forest was dripping and silent, the air heavy and cold. I knew I needed water. Desperation drove. I always liked hiking alone. It gave me a sense of control, a break from all the noise that filled up daily life. The silence of the woods had a way of quieting down my head, and the long stretches of trail gave me time to think without interruption. That was what pulled me out that summer when I decided to hike a section of a mountain trail that cut deep through a national forest. I had been building up to it for months, taking weekend trips, pushing myself with longer distances, heavier packs, rougher terrain. I thought I was ready for something more serious. The trail I chose wasn't one of the famous ones. It didn't have a lot of online chatter about it, and that was part of the reason I picked it. I wanted the quiet. It was supposed to take about 4 days to finish, but I brought enough food and gear for 6, just in case. My plan was simple: walk until I was tired, set up camp, sleep, wake up, and keep moving. I started in the early morning, when the air was still cool and the sun was just beginning to filter through the trees. My pack was heavy but familiar. I had packed it and repacked it so many times that I knew where everything was by memory. Water filter, stove, tarp, sleeping bag, first aid kit, spare batteries, knife, extra layers, food sealed tight in bags. Everything had its place. I felt good as I walked, confident. The first day was calm. The forest was alive with the sounds of insects and birds, and the trail wound through tall pines and thick brush. I saw no one, not a single person. That was exactly what I had wanted. Solitude. By evening, I found a flat spot near a small stream and set up camp. I boiled water, ate my dehydrated meal, and sat watching the last light fade between the trees. It felt like I had the entire world to myself. The second day, I pushed harder. The trail started to climb, and the pack seemed heavier than before. Sweat soaked through my shirt, and the straps rubbed my shoulders raw. But I kept moving. I told myself this was what I had come for, to test myself against something bigger than me. The forest grew thicker, the air damper. I noticed how dark it stayed under the canopy even during midday. The light didn't cut through in big patches, just small broken pieces that barely reached the forest floor. By the time the sun went down, I was deeper into the woods than I had ever been in my life. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing things outside the tarp, small rustles in the underbrush, twigs snapping. At first, I told myself it was just animals, maybe deer or raccoons, but it kept going closer and closer. I held my breath, listening. My heart beat so loud I thought it might give me away. I clutched the handle of my knife inside the sleeping bag. I stayed like that for what felt like hours until exhaustion finally pulled me under. When I woke in the morning, everything looked normal. Nothing had been disturbed. My food was still hung high in a tree where animals couldn't get to it, my gear untouched. I told myself it had been my imagination, my body reacting to being alone in such a vast space. The third day was when things started to feel different. The trail became harder to follow. Blazes on trees were fewer and farther apart, and sometimes I had to stop and search for the next one. At one point, I lost it completely and spent nearly an hour circling through the trees until I found it again. That shook me. Getting lost out here wasn't an option. I forced myself to slow down, to pay closer attention. But the forest was disorienting. Everything looked the same. Tree after tree, rock after rock, shadows layered on shadows. By late afternoon, I was tired, more tired than I should have been for the distance I had covered. My shoulders ached. My knees hurt with every step, and my throat was dry no matter how much I drank. I began to feel a heaviness that wasn't just in my body but in the air around me. The forest seemed too quiet. I realized I hadn't heard birds in hours. Even the insects seemed muted. It was just me, my footsteps, and the creak of my pack straps. That night, I set up camp on a ridge, thinking the higher ground would help me feel safer. I cooked, ate, and crawled into my bag as the light faded. Again, the noises started. At first distant, then closer. Not just rustling this time, but deliberate sounds, like weight pressing down on leaves and branches. Footsteps, slow, measured, heavy. I lay perfectly still, staring at the thin fabric of my tarp, my body stiff with fear. I told myself it was a deer again, maybe even a bear, though that should have made me more afraid. But something about the rhythm of those steps felt wrong. Too careful, too much like my own. I gripped the knife again, listening. The sounds circled, then stopped, then started again. My mouth went dry, and I could feel sweat running down my sides even though the night was cool. I don't know how long it went on, but eventually, exhaustion overtook me again, and I passed into a fitful sleep. When I woke, my tarp had been disturbed. The corner that I had staked down had come loose, and the fabric was lifted slightly. I checked my food bag, still tied up in the tree, untouched. Nothing else looked wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I packed quickly that morning and set off earlier than usual. My eyes scanned the ground constantly, looking for signs that someone might have passed through. I saw nothing, but I couldn't stop the thought from repeating in my head. Someone was out there. Someone was following me. The forest seemed even darker that day. Clouds had rolled in, blocking what little sunlight managed to cut through the trees. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me with every step. The trail twisted and turned, sometimes fading to almost nothing before picking back up again. My legs burned, my back ached, and the silence was absolute. Every time I stopped, I strained to hear, convinced that the sound of footsteps would follow. By evening, I found myself in a low valley where the air was damp and cold. I didn't want to stop there, but I had no choice. My body was giving out. I set up camp quickly, ate little, and crawled into my bag as soon as darkness fell. That night was the worst. I woke to the sound of breathing, slow, steady, close. My eyes shot open, and I lay frozen, staring at the thin fabric above me. I could hear it right outside, moving around the tarp. My hand slid slowly to the knife, my grip tight. The breathing shifted, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, like whoever or whatever it was circling me. I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake until the first pale light of dawn filtered into the valley. When I finally crawled out, nothing was there. The ground was wet from dew, but I saw no clear footprints, only the disturbed leaves and soil that could have been from anything. By then, I knew I had to get out. I checked my map and realized I was still at least 2 days from the end of the trail. I thought about turning back, but that was even farther. The only choice was to keep going forward. I pushed hard that day, forcing myself to cover as much ground as possible. I stumbled more than once, my legs shaky and weak. My throat felt raw, and I rationed my water carefully. I kept glancing behind me, certain that if I looked long enough, I would see someone there. But I never did. That night, I didn't set up camp. I found a thick cluster of trees, crouched behind them, and sat with my back to the trunk, knife in my lap. I thought if I stayed awake, if I stayed hidden, maybe whatever was following me would pass by. Hours dragged on, the forest heavy with silence. Then came the footsteps again, slow, steady, moving through the trees. My chest tightened, and I pressed myself against the bark, barely breathing. The steps grew louder, closer, until they were just beyond where I sat. Then they stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I waited, my whole body trembling, but nothing came. Finally, after what felt like forever, the steps started again, moving away this time. I stayed frozen until dawn. The last day was pure survival. My legs barely carried me. My pack felt like it weighed twice as much, and every sound set my nerves on edge. But when I finally saw the trailhead, when the forest opened into the small gravel lot where I had parked days before, I almost collapsed with relief. I dropped my pack into the dirt, climbed into my car, and locked the doors. My hands shook on the wheel as I pulled away, the trees sliding past on either side. Only then did I let myself breathe fully, my chest heaving as if I had been holding it all in for days. I don't know who or what was out there. Maybe it was a hunter, maybe some stranger living in the woods, maybe just my mind breaking down from exhaustion and fear. But I know what I heard, I know what I felt, and I know I'll never hike alone again. I had been planning the hike for weeks. I wanted something challenging but still within my limits, something that would test me without putting me in real danger. I picked a trail that was long, steep, and isolated, cutting across a mountain range that was known for its winding switchbacks and thick forests. It wasn't one of the popular trails, the kind that got crowded on weekends with families and joggers. This one was tucked away, a little harder to reach, and I liked the idea of being mostly alone with nothing but the sound of wind in the trees and the crunch of dirt under my boots. I parked my car at a small gravel turnout near the base of the range. The sun was just coming up, thin streaks of pale light spreading across the sky. The morning air was sharp and cool, and when I pulled on my pack, the weight of it felt steady against my back. I had water, food, a map, a compass, a first aid kit, a flashlight, extra clothes, and my phone with a backup battery. I had gone through the list a dozen times the night before, making sure I didn't forget anything. The trail started with a slow incline. The ground was damp from rain earlier in the week, and I could smell the earth, thick and heavy like it had soaked in every bit of water it could. The trees here were tall and packed tightly, their branches arching overhead until it felt like I was moving through a tunnel. The only sounds were birds and the occasional crack of a branch snapping under my boots. As the morning stretched on, the trail grew steeper. I climbed through a series of switchbacks, each one cutting back sharply, rising higher into the ridge. My legs burned, my breathing grew heavier, and sweat ran down my back even though the air was still cool. I liked the burn. I liked the steady rhythm of climbing higher, step after step. I stopped a few times to take in the view, though at this point the trees still blocked most of it. By late morning, I had reached a ridge where the trees thinned and I could see across the valley. The mountains rolled out in layers, blue and hazy in the distance, with a river cutting through the bottom like a silver thread. I sat on a rock, drank water, and ate a protein bar. Everything was quiet, and I thought about how far I had come already and how far I still had to go. The trail ahead looked rougher. It wound back into dense forest, and I knew from the map that it would climb for several more miles before leveling off. I pressed on. The switchbacks became tighter, steeper. The ground here was rockier, littered with loose stones that shifted under my boots. In some places, parts of the trail had eroded, leaving the dirt narrow and uneven. I had to watch each step carefully, planting my feet solidly before taking the next. Sweat dripped down my forehead and into my eyes. The straps of my pack dug into my shoulders. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher and the heat built, pressing down through the canopy. I drank often but forced myself to ration, knowing I needed the water to last the day. The trail was quiet now except for insects buzzing and the occasional rustle of something small moving through the underbrush. The higher I went, the lonelier it felt. I told myself that was part of the reason I came, to be alone, to test myself, to know I could handle it. But somewhere in the back of my head, a small, uneasy feeling began to stir. It was nothing at first, just a thought I couldn't quite shake. The feeling that I hadn't seen another person since I left the trailhead. No hikers, no runners, no one. I had expected at least a couple of people out here, but the trail was empty. And the deeper I went, the quieter everything seemed. The air changed too. It felt thicker somehow, like it was harder to breathe. The forest pressed closer, the trees growing taller and tighter, their branches knotted together high above. The ground was damp again, soft in some places, and my boots left deep prints. I started to notice animal tracks too, pressed into the mud beside the trail. Deer maybe, or something larger. I didn't know for sure, but some of them looked fresh. I pushed the unease down and kept moving. By the time afternoon came, I realized I was more tired than I should have been. The climb had been steady but not impossible, yet my legs shook when I paused, and my shoulders ached under the weight of my pack. I told myself I just needed food. I found a fallen log, sat, and pulled out some trail mix and jerky. My hands trembled slightly as I ate. That was when I noticed how silent it had become. Not just quiet, but silent. No wind, no insects, no birds. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you hear nothing but the sound of your own breathing. I sat very still, chewing slowly, listening, waiting for some small noise to break it. Nothing came. I shoved the rest of the food into my mouth and stood quickly, brushing dirt from my pants. My heart beat faster, and I couldn't explain why. I just knew I wanted to keep moving. The trail kept climbing. The switchbacks grew longer now, stretched across the slope, and I lost track of how many I had crossed. The forest felt endless, one bend leading to another, always more trees, more dirt, more stone. I started to check my watch more often. I had wanted to be back at my car before dark, but now I wasn't sure if I would make it. Then I came to a split. It wasn't on my map. The trail, which had been narrow but clear, suddenly divided into two paths. Both were worn, both looked used, and both disappeared into the trees. I stopped, staring, trying to decide. I pulled out my map, unfolded it, and traced the line with my finger. There was no split here. It should have kept going straight. My throat tightened. I tried to think it through. Maybe one was an older route, an old switchback that had been rerouted. Maybe one was a game trail that hikers had mistakenly followed over time. Both looked real enough. The dirt was packed, footprints pressed into each. I crouched to look closer, but the prints overlapped and faded, making it impossible to tell which way was more traveled. I stood there too long. The air was heavy and still, the silence pushing in. I had to choose. I picked the left path. At first it seemed fine. It wound upward like before, twisting through the trees, climbing steadily. But after 15 minutes, something felt wrong. The trail narrowed until it was little more than a line through the brush. Branches clawed at my arms, and thorns scratched across my legs. The ground grew softer, wetter, until my boots sank slightly with each step. I pushed on, telling myself it would open again, but it only grew worse. Finally I stopped, sweat dripping, lungs burning. This wasn't right. I dropped my pack, pulled out the map again, and tried to make sense of where I was. The lines blurred in my eyes. I wiped sweat away, held the compass steady, but I couldn't match what I saw on paper with what surrounded me. That was when I heard the sound. A branch snapping. Close. I froze. My head turned slowly, eyes scanning the trees. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just trunks, leaves, shadows. Then another snap, farther off but still too close. Something was moving. I grabbed my pack quickly, shoving the map inside, and forced myself back down the way I had come. My boots slid on the wet ground, branches slapping at me. I moved fast, almost running, trying to retrace the path. My breath came hard and fast, and my heart pounded so loud it filled my ears. When I reached the split again, I didn't stop. I took the other path and pushed forward, not daring to look back. The trail wound sharply, climbing again, and I moved as fast as I could. I didn't hear any more snaps, but the silence was still there, heavy and unnatural. My legs screamed with each step, and my pack dug deeper into my shoulders. After what felt like forever, the path opened slightly onto a narrow ridge. The view stretched across the mountains again, the valley far below, the river a faint glimmer in the distance. I stopped, panting, leaning against a tree for balance. That was when I realized I didn't know where I was anymore. The trail behind me twisted down into the trees. The trail ahead curved upward, disappearing around a rock face. I couldn't match any of it to the map. I tried, standing there with the paper trembling in my hands, but nothing fit. I was off course, and the sun was starting to sink. Shadows stretched across the ridge, the light fading to a dim orange glow. I shoved the map away and pulled out my flashlight, turning it over in my hand. I hated the thought of hiking in the dark, but I didn't see another option. I had to keep moving, had to try to find the right trail again. I pushed on. The trail grew rougher. Rocks jutted up, roots twisted across the ground, and I stumbled more than once. My boots scraped, my knees ached, and every step felt heavier. I flicked the flashlight on when the last light drained from the sky, its narrow beam cutting through the dark. The forest around me looked different now, stranger. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper, the silence thicker. Hours passed. At some point, I knew I was completely lost. I stopped trying to follow the map. It was useless now. The trail I have always liked being outdoors. Hiking was something I picked up in my early 20s, and it quickly became a part of my life. At first, I stayed to short trails near home, easy paths where I could just clear my head and not worry about much. But after a while, I began searching for longer trails, ones that went deep into the mountains, where it was just me, the forest, and the weight of my backpack. The quiet was what I loved most. The kind of quiet where you could hear the wind shift through the trees and your own breathing felt louder than it should. The story I'm about to write happened when I was 32. It was in the late summer, when the days were still hot but the nights dropped into a chill once the sun went down. I had driven out to a large forest reserve I had never been to before, somewhere that stretched over miles of rugged mountain slopes, thick pine groves, rocky ridges, and deep ravines. There were marked trails, but most of them ran for days before you'd ever loop back. That was what I wanted. I had packed enough food for 5 days, carried a water filter, a tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, and everything else I normally brought. I wasn't new to this. I felt confident. The plan was simple. Start from the base, climb one of the long trails to a ridgeline, cut across a few valleys, and loop back down another path that returned to the main lot where I left my car. The trail I picked was considered strenuous but not impossible. I had done worse. At the ranger station, I signed my name on the log so they'd know someone was out there. That always gave me a strange feeling. Seeing my name on a sheet of paper surrounded by strangers, all heading in different directions. But it was routine. I started early that morning. The first stretch wasn't bad. The dirt trail wound through tall trees with golden light breaking through the branches. The air smelled clean, full of pine and dust. My boots crunched on dry leaves. It was the kind of walking where you let your mind wander. After a couple hours, I stopped for a drink near a small stream that cut across the trail, filled my bottle with filtered water, and ate a quick snack. Everything was normal. By mid-afternoon, the trail began to climb steeper. The air grew thinner, and the forest around me changed. The trees spaced farther apart, the ground became rockier, and I could hear the faint whistle of wind even when the branches barely moved. My shoulders ached from the pack, and sweat had soaked through the back of my shirt. I remember looking up and seeing the ridge still far above me, thinking how small I looked compared to it. But that was the point, being swallowed by something bigger than me. I pressed on. The hours stretched. At one point, I realized I hadn't seen another hiker since the morning. It wasn't unusual. Most people didn't take the same trail this far, but the silence felt different, heavier, as if the world around me had gone still. I pushed the thought aside. Late in the afternoon, I reached a flat clearing tucked against a slope. It was a perfect place to set camp for the night. There were tall grasses, a patch of soft ground, and a view of the distant valley. I pitched my tent, gathered some dry sticks, and lit a small fire just to boil water for dinner. After eating, I sat on a rock and watched the sun sink behind the ridge. The sky turned orange, then red, then dark blue. One by one, stars appeared. I could hear faint chirps of insects and the occasional hoot of something far away. It should have felt peaceful, but instead I felt restless. When I finally crawled into my tent and zipped the door shut, I thought I would sleep easily from the exhaustion of the hike, but I kept waking up. Sometimes it was the wind rattling the thin fabric. Other times it was nothing at all, just me snapping awake with my heart beating too fast. Each time, I would listen carefully, holding my breath, waiting for a sound that explained it. But there was nothing, only the far-off rustle of the forest. Eventually, I fell into a light, uneasy sleep. The next morning, I packed up early. My body ached, but I pushed through it. The trail wound higher, sharper switchbacks that cut along a narrow ridge with steep drops to one side. I kept my focus on each step. By midday, I reached the highest part of the climb and stopped to catch my breath. From there, I could see miles of jagged terrain below me. Forest stretched endlessly, broken by rocky cuts and glimmering streams. It should have filled me with awe. Instead, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I moved down the other side. The trail grew rougher. Roots and rocks stuck up in uneven places, making me watch every step. Around mid-afternoon, clouds gathered. They weren't thick storm clouds, just thin gray streaks that dulled the sun. The air turned cooler, and a faint damp smell rose, like wet soil. I decided I'd need to find another campsite soon. That's when I noticed the first sign something was wrong. I came across a section of the trail where the dirt looked torn up, like something heavy had been dragged across it. At first, I thought maybe it was just erosion from water runoff, but the marks were uneven, like grooves carved by something being pulled. They trailed off into the brush. I stopped and stared at them longer than I should have, then forced myself to keep moving. Not far past that, I spotted a broken branch hanging halfway down. It wasn't unusual to see branches fall, but this one looked snapped at shoulder height, splintered fresh. The hairs on my arms prickled. I walked faster. By the time evening came, I was deep in another valley. The light faded faster between the steep walls, and the trees closed in thicker. I found a small patch of flat ground beside a cluster of boulders and set up camp there. I cooked quickly, ate, and tried to ignore the strange unease building inside me. That night, I didn't sleep much at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something moving outside. A soft crunch of leaves, a snap of a twig, the sound of weight shifting just beyond the thin fabric wall of my tent. I kept telling myself it was animals, a deer maybe, even a bear, though that thought made me grip the knife I kept beside my sleeping bag tighter. Hours dragged by. At one point, I swore I saw a shadow fall across the side of my tent as the moonlight shifted. My throat went dry, and I didn't move for minutes. When morning finally came, I crawled out to find nothing there. No prints I could see, no sign of anything out of place. But the ground was covered in pine needles, which might have hidden them. I kept going. The third day was worse. My nerves felt stretched thin. Every sound in the woods made me turn my head. At times, I thought I saw movement in the trees. A flash of something dark between the trunks, gone as soon as I looked straight at it. I stopped eating much. My stomach felt tight and unsettled. I only forced myself to drink water. The trail twisted along another ridge, this one narrower than before. I kept my eyes on the ground, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Once, I turned quickly, certain I'd heard footsteps behind me. The trail was empty. I stood there for a long time, my heart thudding, before moving on. That evening, I camped near a stream. I filtered water, splashed my face, and tried to calm down. The forest was too quiet. Even the usual sounds of birds had faded. I lay awake in my tent, straining my ears. Sometime after midnight, I heard it clearly. Footsteps. They were slow, heavy, deliberate. Not the light skitter of an animal. Not the shuffle of a small thing in the brush. These were measured steps, pressing into the ground, circling somewhere near my camp. My mouth went dry. My chest felt frozen. I gripped my knife so hard my hand hurt. The steps moved, pausing, then starting again. Closer, then farther. I didn't breathe. Minutes stretched into an hour, maybe more. Finally, silence returned. I stayed awake until dawn, shaking, my body tense and sore from not moving. When I stepped outside, there were faint impressions in the ground near the stream. Not clear footprints, but shapes pressed into the soil. Too large to be a deer, too heavy. I packed up as fast as I could. By then, I knew one thing. I wasn't alone. The rest of the hike became survival. I barely thought about the trail anymore. I just moved, pushing myself harder than I ever had. My shoulders burned from the pack. My legs felt like they would give out, but I couldn't stop. The fear drove me forward. Every now and then, I caught the faintest sound behind me, a branch snapping, the thud of something moving. Each time, I turned and saw nothing. The trees stretched endless, hiding whatever followed. By the fourth night, I was nearly broken. I didn't set up a tent. I just sat against a tree, clutching my knife, staring into the dark. I don't think I slept at all. Every hour, I thought I heard movement. My skin felt like it was crawling. The next day, I forced myself down the trail. My food was almost gone. My throat was raw from breathing too fast. The weight of being hunted, because that's what it felt like, being hunted, crushed down on me. Finally, I never thought a simple hike could change the way I looked at the woods. I had always enjoyed being outdoors. Hiking was my way to clear my head and escape the noise of life. I liked being alone on the trail, just me. The sound of my boots on the dirt, the smell of pine and damp soil, the weight of my pack pulling against my shoulders. I thought I knew enough to stay safe: maps, compass, extra food, layers of clothing, water filter. I was careful, or at least I thought I was. But nothing prepared me for the time I underestimated just how quickly things can turn bad when you are miles deep in the wilderness with no one around. It was early autumn, cool enough that the air felt sharp in the morning but warm enough in the afternoon to hike in short sleeves. The leaves had started to turn, and the forest was full of reds, oranges, and yellows. I had planned a 3-day solo hike through a national forest I had never visited before. The plan was simple: park my truck at the trailhead, hike about 15 miles the first day, camp, continue another 12 miles the second day, and then finish with 10 miles back to the truck. I had looked at maps, checked the weather, and packed carefully. I was excited to push myself, enjoy the solitude, and maybe take some photos. Felt like it would be just another good trip. The first day went smoothly. I started early, just as the sun was climbing up, burning the mist off the low ground. My pack was heavy, but I had balanced it well. The trail cut through thick forest, the ground soft with layers of old leaves. I passed streams and little clearings where the grass bent under dew. I saw no one after the first couple of miles. By the time I stopped for lunch, the sun was high, and the woods were quiet except for distant bird calls and the occasional crack of something moving through brush. I ate, drank some water, and kept going. The terrain got steeper as the afternoon went on. The trail narrowed and climbed along the side of a ridge. The higher I went, the more the trees thinned, giving me glimpses of rolling forest stretching far out. It felt like I was the only person in miles, maybe the only one in the entire forest. That was the feeling I liked, the sense of being small, tucked away from the world. By late afternoon, I reached a flat area near a stream. It looked like a good place to set up camp. I pitched my small tent, gathered water, and made a simple dinner on my stove. As the sun dropped, the woods darkened quickly. The temperature fell, and soon I was zipped into my sleeping bag, listening to the quiet sounds outside, the flow of water, the rustle of leaves. I slept better than I expected, waking only once to adjust my bag against the cold. Morning came gray and damp, but I felt rested. The second day started fine, but the trail became less obvious as I went deeper. There were still blazes painted on trees, but they were spread far apart, and some looked faded. The ground was covered in thick leaf fall, making the path blend into everything else. I had to stop often to check my compass and map, making sure I was still heading in the right direction. It slowed me down, but I wasn't too worried. I had time. By early afternoon, clouds began to gather. The air felt heavy, and the forest grew darker, though it was still hours from evening. The wind picked up, bending branches, scattering leaves across the trail. Then the rain came, at first light, then steady, cold, and relentless. My jacket kept me dry for a while, but soon everything felt damp. The trail turned slick, mud clinging to my boots. Water ran down the slope, cutting small streams across the path. I had planned to hike until evening, but the rain made me consider stopping early. I pushed on for another hour before realizing it was useless. I was wet, cold, and tired. The light was fading under the thick clouds, and the trail was barely visible. I looked for a flat spot off the path and found one under a cluster of tall pines where the ground was a little drier. I set up the tent with stiff fingers, the fabric sticking with wetness. By the time I crawled inside, I was shivering. That night was rough. Rain drummed on the tent nonstop, and wind pushed against the thin walls. The ground felt uneven beneath my pad, and I couldn't get warm no matter how I adjusted. I must have drifted off and woken a dozen times. Every sound outside seemed louder in the storm. Branches breaking, water rushing, things moving in the dark. My mind kept circling around the thought of being so far from anyone, soaked, with no easy way out if things got worse. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but mist hung heavy over everything. The trees dripped, the ground squished with each step, and my gear felt damp despite being inside the tent. I ate a cold breakfast, packed up slowly, and tried to regain some optimism. I figured the worst had passed. But within an hour of hiking, I realized something was wrong. The trail disappeared. I backtracked, searching for the last blaze, but I couldn't find it. The rain had washed out sections, and the leaf cover hid everything. I checked my compass, tried to match landmarks to the map, but the forest looked the same in every direction. Wet trees, mist, and slopes. I told myself not to panic. I picked a direction that seemed right according to the map and pressed on, marking trees with small scratches so I could trace back if needed. The ground was slick, and several times I slipped, catching myself on roots or rocks. Hours passed, and I saw no sign of the trail. My legs grew heavy, my back ached from the pack, and my stomach clenched with hunger. I stopped to eat a granola bar, but even chewing felt like work. By mid-afternoon, the sky darkened again. More rain. It started as drizzle, then turned steady. My jacket was already wet, and soon I was soaked again. My boots filled with water from streams and puddles. I felt the chill deep in my bones. I kept moving to stay warm, but each step felt slower. That's when I noticed the forest changing. The ground grew rougher, more tangled with roots and rocks. The slopes became steeper, and gullies cut through the land, filled with rushing water from the rain. I realized I was descending into a lower area, maybe a drainage or ravine. I tried to climb back to higher ground, but the wet soil made it impossible. Every time I grabbed at branches or rocks, they slipped from my hands. I slid down more than once, coating myself in mud. Evening was approaching fast. I needed to find a place to stop, but the land offered no flat, dry spots. Everything was sloped, tangled, wet. Finally, I found a small rise above a swollen stream. It wasn't great, but it was better than nothing. I set up the tent in the rain, my fingers numb and clumsy. By the time I crawled inside, I was shaking uncontrollably. I changed into my last dry set of clothes, climbed into my damp sleeping bag, and tried to rest. That night was worse than the last. The rain hammered down, the stream roared louder and louder, and the wind bent the trees above me. I kept imagining the water rising, flooding the tent, sweeping me away. Every sound outside kept me awake. The splash of water, the crack of branches, the thud of something falling. I felt trapped, small, and utterly alone. Morning brought no relief. The rain had slowed, but mist still clung to everything. My gear was wet, my body sore, and my food supply shrinking. I forced myself to eat a little, then packed up again. My map was damp and hard to read. The ink smudged. I tried again to navigate, but the forest twisted in ways that didn't match. As the day wore on, I realized how deep I had gone. The forest felt endless. The trees packed so thick that light barely reached the ground. My legs ached from climbing over fallen logs and pushing through wet undergrowth. My water filter clogged with mud, forcing me to drink less. My stomach growled constantly. By late afternoon, I admitted to myself I was lost. Truly lost. No trail, no blazes, nothing familiar. Just endless wet trees and the sound of water everywhere. Panic came in waves. I would fight it down, focus on taking one step at a time. Then it would rise again when I thought about how far I must be from anyone. That night, I barely slept. The forest felt heavier, darker. I heard animals moving close, snapping twigs, rustling brush. My mind went to the worst possibilities. A bear? A cougar? Something desperate and hungry in the rain. I clutched my small knife, though I knew it would do little. Every sound seemed closer, sharper. I waited for something to tear into the tent, but nothing came. Only the sounds of the forest, relentless and unnerving. Days blurred together. I hiked by day, camped by night, always wet, always cold. My food dwindled until I was rationing crumbs. My body weakened, my thoughts slowed, and I stumbled often. My legs were covered in cuts from brush. My hands blistered from grabbing branches and rocks. At one point, I found what looked like an old logging road, half overgrown but still a strip of open ground through the forest. I had been planning the hiking trip for weeks. The place I chose was a section of national forest that stretched for miles without much development. It wasn't the most popular spot, and that was part of the appeal. Most people preferred the well-marked, shorter trails closer to the ranger station. But I had decided to take on one of the longer loops that cut deep into the forest before circling back. On paper, it was listed as a 2-day hike for most people, but I had packed enough food, water, and gear for 3 days just in case. I wanted to take my time and not rush, and I also wanted to test myself a little. The morning I arrived, the parking lot was almost empty. It was early, and the sun was still low, lighting up the tops of the trees while the ground stayed cool and damp. My backpack felt heavy when I lifted it out of the car, but I knew once I adjusted to the weight it would be manageable. I had everything: tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, stove, fuel, food, water filters, map, compass, and a GPS unit as backup. I double-checked the laces on my boots, shouldered the pack, and started off toward the trailhead. The first part of the hike was pleasant. The path was clear, wide enough that I could see ahead without worrying about tripping on roots. The forest smelled like pine and damp earth, and the sound of birds carried through the branches. The trail climbed slowly, winding along a ridge that offered glimpses of valleys below. I stopped a few times to drink water and adjust my straps, but I felt strong and steady. By late morning, I had already covered several miles. The sun was high, and the air grew warmer. I ate a quick snack and studied the map. The trail was supposed to split about 5 miles in, and I needed to follow the left fork to stay on the main loop. The right fork, according to the map, was an older trail that wasn't maintained anymore. It showed as a dotted line and ended near a river, but there was no connection back to the main path. I made a note of it and kept going. When I reached the split, I paused. The left trail looked worn and well used, just as I expected. The right trail, though, didn't look as overgrown as I thought it would. It was narrower, but still clear enough to follow. For some reason, I felt a pull to see where it went. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the thought of fewer footprints, or maybe it was just the idea of walking where fewer people had been. I knew I shouldn't, but I stepped onto the right fork. At first, it wasn't bad. The trail wound downhill and the trees grew thicker. The ground was softer here, covered in moss and old leaves. The air smelled wetter, like it was leading toward water. I kept checking the map, telling myself I would just see where it went before turning back. But the trail had a way of drawing me forward. Every time I thought about turning around, I convinced myself to go just a little farther. An hour passed, then another. The trail became rougher, with fallen branches and rocks scattered across it. I tripped once, catching myself with my hands before I fell completely. My palms stung, and dirt stuck to the sweat on my skin. I stopped and pulled out the map again. The dotted line wasn't detailed, and I couldn't tell exactly how far I had come. I should have turned back then, but the sound of running water reached my ears. I pushed on, thinking I could at least make it to the river before deciding what to do. When I reached the river, I felt both relief and unease. The water was clear, rushing over smooth stones and carrying bits of foam downstream. It was beautiful, but the banks were muddy and uneven, and the trees pressed close on both sides. The trail seemed to vanish near the water. I dropped my pack, knelt to filter water into my bottles, and then stood there, trying to decide. I could have turned back right there. It would have taken me hours, but I could have retraced my steps and rejoined the main trail before evening. Instead, I noticed a faint path continuing along the riverbank. It wasn't on the map, but it looked like other people had walked it at some point. I felt tired already, and the idea of climbing back uphill didn't sound appealing. I told myself the side trail might loop back somehow, maybe connecting to another section. Against my better judgment, I shouldered my pack and followed it. The path hugged the river, winding over rocks and roots. Sometimes it narrowed to almost nothing, and I had to push through undergrowth. My legs grew scratched, and sweat dripped down my face. After another hour, I realized I had lost track of direction. The river bent and twisted, and without clear landmarks, I couldn't tell which way I was headed. My GPS unit beeped when I tried to check it, the screen flashing weak signal. The trees were too thick, blocking reception. A knot of worry settled in my stomach. I kept going, but every step felt heavier. The river noise was constant, masking other sounds, and the deeper I went, the less sure I was that I could retrace the path. At some point, I stopped, set down my pack, and forced myself to breathe slowly. I needed to think. The safest choice was to turn around immediately, but when I looked behind me, the way back was harder to recognize. Branches bent differently, and the muddy ground had been churned up by my boots. I thought I knew where I had come from, but when I walked a short distance that way, the path faded. Panic prickled at the back of my neck. I returned to the riverbank and tried to calm down. I decided to camp there for the night. The sun was already dipping low, and stumbling around in the dark would only make things worse. I found a patch of flat ground a little above the river and cleared sticks away. Setting up my tent gave me something to focus on, though my hands trembled as I drove the stakes in. By the time I boiled water for dinner, shadows filled the forest. That night, I barely slept. Every crack of branches made me sit up. I kept imagining footsteps, though I knew it was just animals. The sound of the river seemed louder in the dark, pressing against my ears. My stomach felt heavy with fear more than food. I must have drifted off at some point, but it didn't feel like rest. In the morning, I packed quickly and tried again to find the trail. I walked upstream for a while, then downstream, hoping to recognize something. Nothing looked familiar. The forest closed in tighter, and the riverbanks turned swampy. At one point, I sank ankle-deep in mud and had to yank my boot free. Hours passed. The sun climbed overhead and then began to sink again. My map was useless now. It showed nothing of where I stood. My compass told me which way was north, but without knowing the layout of the land, that didn't help much. I tried to head in one direction steadily, thinking eventually I would cross another trail or road, but the forest twisted me around. Hills rose and fell, and sometimes I found myself circling without realizing it. By the second night, exhaustion crushed me. I made camp in a small clearing, my body sore and my throat dry despite the river water. I ate sparingly, worried about my supplies. I still had food for another 2 days if I rationed, but the thought of being out longer made my stomach twist. The third day was worse. My legs ached with every step, and my shoulders burned under the pack straps. I slipped on wet leaves and scraped my shin, blood running down into my sock. I cursed under my breath but kept moving. The air felt heavier that day, the forest quieter. At times I stopped, convinced I heard something moving through the trees, but every time it faded. By afternoon, my sense of direction was gone. The compass needle pointed north, but the land itself seemed to fold in on me. I climbed a ridge, hoping to see an opening, but the trees stretched endlessly in every direction. Panic rose again, but I forced it down. I knew if I lost control, I'd make mistakes. That night, I barely ate. I sat in the tent, staring at the thin fabric walls, listening to the forest. My flashlight beam caught the glint of animal eyes once, low to the ground, watching from a distance. I shouted and the eyes vanished, but my hands shook for an hour after. By the fourth day, I knew I was in real danger. My food was running out and my body felt weak. I forced myself to keep walking, to keep looking for anything. A road, a sign, even another person. The forest felt endless, and the river I had been following disappeared into swampy ground I couldn't cross. I turned back and tried another way, my boots soaked, blisters burning on my heels. That evening, as the sun slid behind the trees, I stumbled onto something unexpected. A cut in the ground, not natural, a ditch or an old logging road, overgrown but straight. Relief flooded me. I dropped to my knees, breathing hard. If people had made it once, maybe it led somewhere. I followed it, stumbling, half running despite the pain in my legs. Branches whipped my face, and the ground tilted, but I kept moving. The line cut through the forest for miles, fading and reappearing, but always forward. My chest hurt, my throat burned, but I didn't stop. Finally, just as the last light faded, I saw it. A signpost, weathered but standing. Faded paint marked the name of the trail I had meant to be on days earlier.